Doug Ford lied to you. I've said this on the channel before. I've said it even before Doug Ford became premier, that the reason why his platform was so skimpy on the details, not only the numbers but on the actual specifics about what he wanted to do, had nothing to do with incompetence and everything to do with the fact that he knew his program would be unpopular. I've noted this on the channel, that in 2014, Tim Hudak ran on a very conservative, openly conservative platform. Say what you will about him, he was honest with the voters, and they rejected him and his party, 100%. And so Doug Ford learned from that and said, well, I'm just not going to tell them the truth. I'm going to say that not one single person is going to lose their job. I'm going to say that, the basic income will survive. And I'm going to say all these things, and when I get in power, I'll just not do them. I'll just lie. And there's no one that can stop me because that's the way our system works, right? And so we're seeing the result of that. Doug Ford never promised massive cuts to education. He never promised massive cuts to teachers' jobs. He has no mandate to make those sorts of decisions because he never ran on them, and yet that's what we're seeing. There's a new report coming out that was reported on in the Toronto Star, which suggests that over the next 5 years, upwards of 10,000 teaching jobs will be lost. Now, apparently, this is from the government's perspective going to be done through attrition, and so they say not a single person will be fired because of this. But one, I don't believe that because we've already seen teachers get laid off. And two, I just frankly think that that sort of argument is incredibly unfair because it, doesn't capture the reality that those jobs are being cut. That there are less jobs for future generations of teachers. There are less jobs in general for, millennial generation and Generation Z. Like there's all of these sorts of things that are affecting future job markets that the spirit of Doug Ford's promise has been broken by. And this is to say nothing of the fact that this will affect education quality. Even if enrollment does decline, the reality is that we could just deploy these teachers in better ways. If enrollment does decline, we don't need to lose 10,000 teachers. We just don't need to. We could have smaller class sizes. We could offer more courses. Teachers could specialize to better prepare our students for university and college and the job market. Like there's so much more we could do if we had more teachers per student, right? Like if we had smaller class sizes, we could have more classes. Instead of what we're seeing right now, which is that kids are being crammed into classrooms and that some kids literally aren't able to get the courses they need to move on to college or university. They're not able to get into a calculus class or what have you. And therefore, they cannot start university because, to take the courses they want at the post-secondary level, you need a prerequisite at the high school level. So this is the reality of the Ford government, folks. They didn't promise any of this. They have no mandate to do any of this. They said that they were going to find efficiencies and actually protect frontline jobs. And while, again, even if we believe the current Ford government isn't breaking its promise because no one is going to directly lose their job, these are just teachers that are retiring and they won't be replaced, those are still job losses. Those are still frontline public service jobs in Ontario being lost. Ford didn't run on that. Ford didn't run on less nurses, less teachers, less doctors, less educational assistants, less custodians. He didn't run on that. He ran on finding efficiencies in a very nebulous term, but went out of his way to suggest this would not affect frontline workers. And in some cases, he even hinted at hiring more teachers and more nurses once the budget was under control. That he wasn't even opposed to increasing, the payroll in certain sectors of the public service when the budget was good. So Doug Ford was very much telling regular Ontarians, look, we're finding efficiencies, but it's not going to affect the jobs that matter to you and your community and to your children and what have you. And that was a bold-faced lie, 100%. So what's the lesson here? The lesson here is that when politicians aren't clear with their platform, it's much less likely to be a case of incompetence and much more likely to be a case of malice. So let's look to this federal election, and let's look to the fact that on many issues, Andrew Scheer and Justin Trudeau haven't been clear with Canadians. Those two parties have a lot of money, a lot of experience, a lot of resources, and whether we like them or not, they have a lot of bright people in the room. They have smart people that can help them craft policies. And yet sometimes they lack real clarity on what it is they're going to do. It's not because they're stupid. It's not because they're lazy. It's not because they're too busy. It's because they don't want you to know the truth. And so this is why, for instance, Catherine McKenna, the Liberal environment minister, is basically saying, look, we don't have the details of our climate plan. We'll figure it out after the election. That sounds an awful lot like Doug Ford, who in part was like, look, we don't really have a platform. Here's some things we want to do, I guess, but like we're going to figure it out after the election. And we saw how that turned out. We saw how that turned out here in Ontario. Doug Ford, quote unquote, figured it out after the election, and we're all suffering because of it. He figured out that he could cut 10,000 teaching jobs. He figured out that he could break his basic income promise. He figured out that he could, attack municipal democracy in Toronto and maybe go beyond that. And he figured out these things, quote unquote, after he got his 5-year bout of absolute power. And Justin Trudeau and the Liberal Party and Andrew Scheer and the Conservative Party are hoping for the same thing. They want you to give them that majority government with absolute unchecked power, and they'll figure out the details about how to use that power after it's too late for you to do anything about it. Doesn't sound like democracy to me. And again, let's be very clear. In the last provincial election, Andrea Horwath was extremely detailed about what she wants to do. And in this federal election, much more than Andrew Scheer and Justin Trudeau, Jagmeet Singh and the NDP are very clear about what they're committing to in terms of spending, in terms of tax increases, in terms of new programs, in terms of the broad vision with a Green New Deal. The NDP is giving you what they are selling. Now, you might not like that, but you're getting it loud and clear and consistently. That's all you should ask for from a politician. When you go into that voting booth, whether you vote for them or against them, you know where they stand. We do not know that on too many issues with Trudeau. We do not know that on too many issues with Andrew Scheer. And we didn't know that on most issues with Doug Ford. And look where Ontario is because of it. Justin Trudeau and Andrew Scheer cannot be trusted with a majority government. They cannot be trusted. The goal for progressives who want to prevent unaccountable and unclear platforms by the Liberals and Conservatives has to be electing wherever possible as many new Democrats as you can. Electing NDPers everywhere you can will increase the likelihood of a minority government. And that doesn't mean that, a Liberal government or a Conservative government won't be able to use their power to implement a policy they had no mandate on. We can't guarantee that, but it'll increase the likelihood that minority parliaments will hold parties to account, even governing parties. Doug Ford, under a proportional system, or Doug Ford, if he was reduced to a minority, would have still been an awful premier. Don't get me wrong. But for the very worst of what he's doing, he would have no mandate to do it. There would be likely a coalition of Liberals and Greens and New Democrats to stop him. There might even be a coalition government led by Andrea Horwath that would have stopped Doug Ford from becoming premier in the first place. The point is that our broken electoral system and cynicism from Liberal and Conservative parties lead to these moments where voters are trapped. They get trapped because there's promises made or there are promises not made, and then actions happen after governments come in. And we're seeing it loud and clear with Doug Ford, but we're also seeing the groundwork laid by Justin Trudeau. There's lack of clarity on the environment. There's lack of clarity on pharmacare. There's lack of clarity on telecommunication prices. All of these things indicate to me is that once they get that power, guys, they will screw us. They will screw regular working Canadians. And they will have no hesitation to do it. They already got your vote. They don't need anything else from you until it's time to vote again. And they're hoping that you'll forget what they did to you. But we don't have to ride that carousel anymore. We can elect accountable governments that have detailed platforms that come from the NDP. And in the short term, we can prevent unaccountable majority governments by either the Liberals or Conservatives, and therefore build a better response after elections when the voters have lost their main source of power.